I make sure up front they understand that I don't own risk. The company owns it
Hmm.
because the companies make decisions on the technologies they bought or the processes that they put in place.
One of the things that stands out to me as just an outsider, I'm not a CISO, is the salary.
He goes, dude, he goes, I'm going to fire you. You've got 90 days. And I just looked at him and I'm like, what? I said, you've got 90 days, find something, get out of here.
Who says tech can't be human?
What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. My guest this episode is a legend in cybersecurity, and to my knowledge, is one of the first chief information security officers that wrote the book to help usher in the next wave of CISOs. My special guest this episode is Gary Hayslip. Gary is the chief information security officer at SoftBank Investment Advisors and author of CISO Desk Reference. There's multiple volumes of this book that will be dropping in just throughout this episode. Gary's also been on the podcast before. He's Hacker Valley alum and most importantly, family. Gary, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Ron. Like I said, I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, glad that you're here. Glad to have you back. I wanted to go back to the archives, go back to the life of Gary. Everyone that I know that knows Gary knows you as a CISO, but there's life before that, and there's things and experiences that you had. So I wanted to start there. Let's rewind back a little bit. What were the things that happened in your career that led up to being a CISO?
Okay. It's the thing was I was I did a full career in the military, before I came out, in private industry. So I mean I was already involved in IT and in cybersecurity when I was in the military, and so I was doing IT already, and I kind of had a security team and an IT team, and doing different stuff, and I I just found, security to be a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
I like puzzles. I like, figuring out how to, fix things and break things and solving for, okay, if we're going to do this and, how would this be hacked or how would this be broken? And I just found more and more, I started aligning more towards security and auditing and looking at how DoD networks were put together. And then before I know it, I was running security teams. And this was in the early
Mm.
2000s. This was around about 2005, 2006, I started noticing the more senior you are, the more you deal with business executive, the more you deal with, leadership teams, the more, if you want to be effective, and so I would say by 2008, 2010 timeframe, right around in there, but then I had transitioned out of the military. I was now working civil service, for the federal government. And that's when I decided to get my MBA because I realized there was a whole other language that was being spoken that I didn't really understand. So I needed to better understand business.
So every chief information security officer that I've spoken to has kind of described not having a clear path. Like there's not really a promotion process or like a career plan that you could like really plan out. There's some people that I know that want to be a CISO that are still trying, and they came from a technical background, and there's other people that have like more of a business background. What was that final push that got you there from being a CIO to chief information security officer?
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, it is interesting that, there is, I mean, because the way each organization uses someone in that role is very
Yeah.
different. So it isn't like, there's just a plan of this is what a CISO is. They do these things and it's always the same in every company and every organization. Because it's not, it's one of those roles that is very
Mhm.
malleable and the business will change things in and out depending on what they want you to do. Now, there are some core things, around managing your security stack, managing some type of risk, probably doing some type of risk management GRC piece. So there's some core things, but that's about 40% of the job. The other 60%, you just don't know what you're going to, deal with. And each company is kind of different. for me, and I think what happens is that a lot of times say you're a network engineer, or maybe you're somebody in dev and you've been running a dev team or whatever. And then you get pulled into, a project that has something security related involved with it. And so you're running a team of people. Some of them are security oriented, some of them are dev oriented or network engineering oriented. And as you're a team leader for that team, you end up becoming known as the security team leader, or, the security manager, or because you're managing security around that group. And so I think what ends up happening is you really start as a team leader,
Yeah.
kind of in charge of a team of people, and you're doing security for the business. And then, as the business matures, the role matures, and then there's more that's expected of you. And a lot of that is trust. They've learned to trust you as the security manager. And so now they're giving you more things to do. And so your role jumps from being a security like leader of a small little team to being a security manager for the organization. And then as the company gets larger and matures, and they're doing more with partners and more with third party, more with stakeholders outside the company, that security manager role jumps up to being a security
Hmm.
director or a chief information security officer. I think depending on the business will depend on whether you're a leader, a manager, a director, or a full on CISO.
Mm.
It depends on the maturity of the business and what they're doing. But as a practitioner, if you're looking at, wanting to eventually be a CISO, look at that line of events. What I would recommend is going from being an individual contributor
Mm.
to running a team, running a project, short term, long term, but being known for being able to run a team, for being able to manage a security issue or multiple security issues across a technology stack. So you pick up that experience, and then becoming some type of a security leader where you're not just dealing with just security, but you're now working with audit, and you're working with compliance, and you're working with finance, and you're working with HR, because now you need to work with peers, and you need to understand how the business works, how they use technology, how they use data. That starts giving you a lot more contextual experience of understanding how security sits at a business
Yep.
and how it impacts the business and what value you're bringing to the business. So you go from project to being a larger leader in the business, and then you're ready to be an CISO. And the reason why CISO is different is CISO, as a CISO, you're running multiple teams.
Yeah, I've been in security since 2010, and it took until 2019 until even became a manager. And part of that was my own doing because I was so caught up into the weeds, into the tech. I loved it, still do. The more that I learn about the CISO role, the less that I feel like I know. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. I'm sure you feel like, there's something that you learn new every day. There's two ways that I look at it though, right? There's the chief information security officer, and then there's the chief security officer. What are the differences and where are the different paths there as well?
Well, I mean, it's like I'm doing both right now. The chief security officer role tends to be more physical security. So it's you kind of have digital security, cyber security, the security operations piece, and that's the traditional stuff. You're dealing with firewalls, you're dealing with identity, you're dealing with email security. Then you have physical security. You're dealing with security cameras and door swipes, and you're dealing with elevators, and you're dealing with lighting in the parking garages, and you're dealing with ID cards and setting policies on when people can access doors and when they can be in buildings. And, unfortunately, you're dealing with, policy on how to deal with active shooters. You're dealing with,
Mm.
how to deal with emergencies like an earthquake CSOs tend to deal with that. And so you tend to have one or the other, though I'm starting to see more CISOs take on the physical security role as well. And the
Mm.
reason is that a lot of the physical security stuff is technology based.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I, I use a technology platform that the cameras and doors and elevators and everything are all tied into. So typically, you kind of see some organizations put them together, smaller organizations, larger organizations kind of break them apart just because they've got, tons of campuses and large buildings. And so you tend to have them as two separate, executives. But, for those CISOs who are, well, I should just be the CISO too. Warning, there's a lot of work involved in physical security, and it's not an easy thing to manage. You definitely want to make sure you have the resources and bandwidth to go ahead and take on, that role if you're thinking about, getting involved with it.
One of our producers reached out right before we hit record, and she was like, "Hey, can you bring something up during the episode?" And it was something that they heard on another podcast, and it was the fact that you had a mentor that said, "If you don't leave this organization, I'm gonna fire you." And it was to help give you that fire in your belly, that push to be a chief information security officer. What's the story behind that?
You know, um, Actually, he's actually a very close friend of mine. His name is Palmer Tasker, and Palmer was awesome. He was, we were federal civil service in the U.S. Navy together. And, he was our CIO at the military, command that I was at. And I was the CSO and the deputy CIO to him. And, and it was actually working with him that I realized, I'm sitting in all these executive meetings with, SES, with senior executive service, personnel from the Department of Defense, and with, admirals and all this stuff. And they're talking budget and they're talking strategy and all this. And I'm just like, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about, that's what I realized, I don't understand income statements and balance sheets and budget and all this. I'm a Navy chief. I was never trained
Yeah.
on that, I was trained more on managing my team and more at the not at the 30,000 foot level, at the 100 foot level, Um, you know, uh, and so that's what drove me to get my MBA. That was a 2-year process, going through the executive MBA program. And and I'm still working with Paul. We're still working, in civil service. And as I was graduating, that's what he told me. He goes, dude, he goes, you've outgrown your role. He goes, you don't need to be here. And unfortunately, at that time, when I was graduating in 2013 with my MBA, most of the SES roles, the senior executive roles in the federal government, especially around cybersecurity, they're all in DC.
Yep.
You know, I didn't really want to move back to DC.
Not from San Diego.
Not from San Diego, and it was just, unfortunately, it's just the way it was. There was a lot of interesting roles that I know that I could have qualified for. And so he goes, yeah, and he basically told me, he goes, that's out for you. He goes, you've outgrown it. It's not available for you. You're not going to sit here in your office staring out that window,
Mhm.
for the next 10, 15 years, thinking that I could have done this or I could have done that. He goes, dude, I'm going to fire you. You've got 90 days. And I just looked at him and I'm like, what? I said, you've got 90 days, find something, get out of here. He goes, and I sit there and at first I was pissed, and then, for about a day,
Yeah.
then I come back to him and it made sense. And I said, you don't need to fire me. I got it. I know what you mean. We'll get it taken care of. And I was gone in about 6 weeks.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and it was kind of funny. It was the first time, you ever get one of those tough lip things from a mentor, and you need that. And for those of us that mentor people, there are times where you got to give them the old Gibbs Denozo slap on the back of the head and say, dude, or do that.
Yeah.
What do you got to tell him or her, what are you doing? That makes no sense. I've managed teams, I've trained, but you get to a certain point where you're like, okay, I've done what I need here from a professional standpoint, from a growth standpoint. I want to flex. I want to add more. I want to do more.
Yep.
Do I have that capability or not? And at the city of San Diego, I had reached out pretty much as far as I was going to go. Um, and then at WebRoot, I was still building and having fun at WebRoot, but we got acquired. and it just happened to be the company that acquired us already had a CISO.
Mm,
And so it was time to move.
yep.
And then at SoftBank, it's just been the last 4.5 years have been a train ride. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, man. One of the things that stands out to me as just an outsider, I'm not a CISO, is the salary. That's the one thing that will really gravitate me towards being a CISO is the salary. We love Michael Piacente at Hitch Partners, and he does the reports every year. And it came out that the report showed, for a private company, maybe you get paid 398 base, and then for a public company, somewhere around 450,000, which is amazing. I think that those are beautiful numbers, and it's rightfully so, especially with all the smoke that's going on right now with solar winds. It's really got people clutching their pearls in a way. But what you don't hear about a lot is the interview process of a CISO. I would imagine, with all of the wide range of skills that you need, all of the opportunity and risk that comes with having someone oversee your security is a big deal. What are some of the kind of key pieces that people interview for to try to find a CISO for their organization?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I mean, the interview process is quite unique because, I mean, a lot of times they pretty much expect that you already have the technical experience coming to the table. You already know about firewalls. You already know about SIM. You already know, what I'm saying? So you have that. But a lot of times what they're wanting to know is that what do you know about GRC and managing risk and keeping our auditors and regulators happy?
Hmm.
What experience do you have with dealing with three-letter agencies and regulators and stuff? What experience do you have in dealing with leadership teams and managing individuals, who have opinions? You know, um, how do you handle if they have different opinions and and managing risk at that level and basically being able to go ahead and get buy-in to get something managed or to get something done. And so they ask you a lot of these situational questions, and I spend a lot of time explaining to them and I make sure up front they understand that I don't own risk. The company owns it
Mm,
because the companies make decisions on the technologies they bought or the processes that they put in place. Some of them have been there for years.
yep.
My job as a CISO is to understand the risk, make it evident, come up with multiple different ways in which we can go ahead and manage it, delete it, transfer it to somebody else. And then we as a team figure out the approach and what we're going to move forward. And then once we move forward, then my team will monitor and then we continually assess. I'm going to be heavily involved, but I am not your scapegoat on decisions that were made before I got there. We will manage them together.
We have some news to share with you, a member of the Hacker Valley Media family. As of 2023, we became a full-time independent cybersecurity media company, and we're committed to bringing you the most powerful, thought-provoking stories in the field of cybersecurity. And we learned we can't do it alone. We'd love to invite you to our exclusive Patreon community where we host a monthly mastermind where you can meet like-minded individuals in the field of cybersecurity that are trying to be more creative and be the best version of themselves that they can be. We would love if you took a second and visited patreon.com/Hacker Valley Studio, and we'll see you in the mastermind.
With that said, I'm also not Mr. No, I'm Mr. Maybe. And what I mean by that is that you can bring things to me. I'm not going to tell you no. I'm going to tell you maybe. We're going to come up with ways in which we can deal with things.
Right.
When I was at Webroot back in 2018, in my process there, I found we had a really old server that freaked me out, and I'm like, why the hell do we got this thing? This should have been deprecated and shut down years ago. Well, by contract, we have to keep the server up because it's running an old piece of software that we still have customers that are using until we're able to shut it down, and we're projecting like 18 months out.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a black and white CISO, you're going to be freaking out saying, we've got to do it this way, da, 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 da. You've got to shut this down. If you are Mr. Maybe, you're like, okay, this is business. They're bringing in several $100,000, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get run over if I try to shut that down.
Right.
However, there's risk exposure. How do I deal with this? You get your team together, you figure out multiple controls that you can, secondary and tertiary controls you can put in place, that you can monitor it. You work with the dev team to make some recommendations so that they can go ahead and, make some changes. And then we manage it. And we were able to shut it down in 6 months.
Hmm.
That's how I look at, as a CISO, that's how I look at you're really effective. And that's how, a lot of the questions I get asked in the interviews is that they're looking at, do you have that experience? Do you have that capability of not being rigid, but being flexible and being able to pivot and being able to make recommendations? Because the business is still going to be the business.
Right.
They're still going to want to go ahead and make money and keep shareholders happy and to be able to go ahead and get stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so you got to figure out is how do you at times help, help the business protect itself from itself,
Yep.
but still not interfere with, the services and the things that they're doing. And, and in a lot of ways for us, so it's a maturity thing. You'll learn about this as you continue to grow in the role. You'll learn about this talking with peers saying, has anybody ever seen this before? What do you guys think? How do what's the approach? And so you kind of grow with it. In the interview process, a lot of the soft skill questions that they're asking about is how do you deal with these kind of things? Because that's what a lot of what the job is. The more senior you get in the role, it's the reason why it's such wide ranging and such impacting is because you're not in a box anymore. I mean, so you get questioned a lot about that and your approach, and a lot of times it isn't a right or wrong question. It's just, they want to understand your approach and then does it fit with how they're currently operating?
Looking at, your background and, what you're doing today, what goes into your role now as CISO at SoftBank Investment Advisors?
Well, I can tell you, we call it SBIA.
Okay.
It's the Vision Fund 2, the Latam Fund. There's multiple investment funds, and we're part of the larger SoftBank group. I can tell you it's not black and white, it's gray, and the reason is that the role itself is pretty wide ranging. I mean, we have the regular, cyber operations and, the security team itself is very integrated with the IT team, and which is normal. I mean, the IT stack and the security stacks tend to be intertwined together. You tend to do, change together. You tend to do your Scrum stand-up meetings together. We also work with our portfolio companies. We have about 560 portfolio companies.
Mm.
I probably get 3 or 4 a month that reach out for different things and everything from, hey, we're writing policy for the first time, or we're getting SOC 2 certified, or, or want to do a tabletop exercise. If it's a cybersecurity company, I'll be really involved, because I typically know the founders or I
Mm.
know the technology or the company. And I'll be working with the investment team. And a lot of times my team, may be involved as well, because they may want their input as well to better understand the technology. um, we also, are a big Gen AI, company as well, where we're using Chat GPT Enterprise and a lot of the different variants, that are being now, integrated into, various SaaS solutions. And so we're already looking at from a security stack point of view, how do we monitor Gen
Mhm.
AI? How do we manage it? Our staff is trained in it. We got policy in place, and we're looking at a lot of different, Gen AI startups, from a monitoring standpoint. So I can look at my team. I want them to use it. I've given them their freeway. They got their lanes. Woohoo, they're running and being innovative. That's fine. But I still need to be able to monitor and make sure that, how we're managing data and who we're giving access or what data we're pulling down. We may pull down data that maybe is intellectual property that belongs to somebody else. And by accident, we should not have it. You know, um, so it's stuff like that. So we're heavy in the Gen AI. Our founder is acquiring companies,
Mhm.
AI related companies, and we, work with them, from a security standpoint, helping them, standing up security, managing and maturing their security processes, getting SOC 2 certified. So it's a wide range of stuff. And then we also have audit. We've got about 5 different regulators that we deal with. So I probably deal with about a dozen audits a year. So I'm up to my eyeballs with audit as well. I mean, so it's a wide range of different things from a technology perspective, from a risk perspective.
I bet. I mean, it sounds like a lot. Before we hit record, we were talking about jamming about Gen AI a bit. And I wish we had a little bit more time to touch on it, but I did have one last question for you because you've written so many books. And for anyone that doesn't know, Gary, you have one of the largest LinkedIn followings that I've seen in cybersecurity. Big kudos for being such a trusted mentor, advisor, and leader in the space. I'm looking at the books. You have the CISO Desk Reference. You have the Essential Guide for Cybersecurity. You also have developed your own path into cybersecurity. Looking at your body of work, looking at the experiences that stand out most to you, which one was your favorite to write?
You know the story how the Desk Reference Guide series came about, don't you?
I don't
You know,
think so.
okay. Well, see, there's Desk Reference Guide Volume 1 and Volume 2,
Hmm.
and they're made to be as a set. That whole thing started, it was kind of funny. I had been writing a lot of articles and stuff for veterans that were transitioning, and I wanted them to come into the cyber, community, to still, because this is a place where you can still have a mission, where you can still serve, and you can still, to me, do good and have that kind of mentality of what it was like when you were in the military. And in writing those articles and stuff, I run into my two co-authors. We're at a startup event. We're having some fish tacos, having a nice, having a nice beer and enjoying chat. And they were like, well, you need to write a book. Matt Stamper's like, well, you need to write a book. And I'm like, oh, that's too much work. I don't want to write a book. And then Bill Bonnie goes, well, why don't we write a book? And so he came up with the idea of, well, why don't we write a book? And then all three of us are looking at each other and we're like, okay. And it just kind of happened, over fish tacos and beer. And then the next day, we're in a meeting and we start mind mapping out what it would look like. And it just progressed from there. And roughly about 14 months later, Volume 1 was published, and it just kind
Oh,
of took
wow.
off from there, and then each of the books have followed. Of the 5 books that I've done, the Volume 1 and Volume 2 for the Desk Reference Guide, and then the executive primer is really written for leadership teams, for CFOs, CIOs, people that work with the CISO and work with the security team. And we wrote the primer to help them understand how to work with us, because we found a lot of times people just don't understand the role as it's progressing and expanding. And we've had CEOs buy the primer and give it to their board members and stuff.
Hmm.
So it's been a really good book. But and then we did the path one was for people coming into the security industry, and I wrote that with Renee Small and Chris Fallon. The last one, well, I think was the best one that I really enjoyed doing, and it was when I was at Webroot. I was dealing a lot with small businesses. Many of them had small security teams or no security teams, and I had written a whole bunch of articles on security. Because most companies are somewhere between 52 employees to 500 employees. They're somewhere in that range. And that's what that book was written for. And that book was written for how to build your first security team. What policies should you write first? How to put together a budget? How to explain to your CEO that you actually need funding? And this is the way, this is an approach, and so that one was, honestly, of the 5 books, the reference guide series I love, and I get people all over the world. It's in multiple languages and it's being used in universities. There's so many people that are in that area, in that startup space, in that space where they're just starting to grow a security team. And that's what that book was for, was to give you a starting point.
Love that. Love that. For anyone that hasn't checked out any of these 5 books, I would recommend picking them all up because they all have their own element that I think anyone in cybersecurity could relate to. Uh, Gary, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to jump on the ones and twos with me and speak to our audience. For anyone that wants to stay up to date with Gary, be sure to check out the show notes or description wherever you're listening or watching, and we will be sure to see you all next time.